The glass partition separating the foyer from his living space was meant to be soundproof, but the child's sobs were a thin, sharp drilling sound that pierced the sterile quiet of the penthouse. Julian Thorne adjusted the cuff of his Brioni suit, his jaw tight. "Ms. Alvarez," he said, his voice a low, controlled hum. "Explain again, slowly." The social worker, looking profoundly tired, gestured to the small blonde girl huddled on the Italian leather bench. The girl, Ilara, was clutching a threadbare teddy bear as if it were a life raft, its button eyes mismatched, its fur worn down to the canvas. She was painfully neat, her fair hair pulled into two severe braids, her thin dress clean but faded. Mr. Thorne, as I've stated, Michael Donovan's will was explicit. In the event of his and Ms. Eliza Vance's death, sole custody and guardianship of Ilara. Vance falls to you. Julian stared. Michael, his eccentric, brilliant, and long-dead co-founder, a man who had cashed out 5 years ago and vanished into obscurity. He left me stock. He left me his vintage car collection. He did not leave me a line item that cries. She's not a line item, sir. She's a 7-year-old girl. Her mother, Eliza Vance, passed away 2 days ago from complications related to long-term illness. Michael Donovan, listed as her godfather, passed away 6 months prior in a climbing accident. His will was unconventional. It named you as the contingent guardian. You were the only person listed. Julian's mind, a machine built for data processing and predictive analysis, ground to a halt. This was not a variable he had ever accounted for. This is impossible. I haven't spoken to Michael in 5 years. I never met this Eliza Vance. I certainly have no connection to the child. Ms. Alvarez sighed, pulling a folder from her worn briefcase. Ms. Vance lived in a studio apartment in the warehouse district. No listed family. No next of kin other than Mr. Donovan, who is deceased. And you. According to this, you are it. If you refuse guardianship, Ilara will become a ward of the state. The foster system is strained. She looked pointedly around the vast, minimalist space, a canyon of white marble, glass, and steel, overlooking the city skyline. Julian's gaze followed hers, seeing his curated life of absolute, immaculate control. A $40 million apartment that didn't have so much as a speck of dust on its surfaces. He looked back at the girl. She had stopped sobbing, but her shoulders hitched in a silent, agonizing rhythm. She was watching him, her eyes a disturbingly clear, pale blue. "Leave her," Julian said, the words feeling foreign, metallic. "What?" Ms. Alvarez looked startled. "Leave her, for now. I need to process this. My legal team will be in contact. You will have whatever you need. Funding, resources, but she can stay here, temporarily." Ms. Alvarez looked torn, a flicker of professional disapproval warring with profound relief. "Mr. Thorne, this isn't a package you can sign for and leave at the door. She needs—" "I am aware of what she needs," Julian interrupted, though he had absolutely no idea. "I am not abandoning her to the system, that is my word. Now please, I have a meeting." The social worker hesitated, then knelt by the girl. "Ilara, you're going to stay here for a little while. It's very nice." Ilara didn't respond, her knuckles white on the bear's neck. Miss Alvarez patted her shoulder, stood, and gave Julian one last long look. She hasn't spoken since her mother passed. Not a word. She'll need a specialist. And kindness. She slid a card onto the glass console table. My direct line. Then she was gone, the heavy steel door gliding shut with an expensive, near-silent thud. Julian was alone with the child. The silence in the penthouse was no longer sterile. It was heavy. Suffocating. He stood there for what felt like an hour, simply watching her. She didn't move. She just stared at the floor. "Ilara?" he said. His voice sounded too loud. She flinched. He cleared his throat, softening his tone. "You can. There's a guest wing. I'll have someone. Prepare it." He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the contact for his personal assistant, Evelyn. What did one even say? "Evelyn, I seem to have acquired a 7-year-old. Please source. Pajamas." He pocketed the phone, the unmade call burning a hole in his pocket. He was Julian Thorne. He managed a $200 billion tech portfolio. He could negotiate hostile takeovers in his sleep. He could not, apparently, face one silent, 70-pound variable. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to the girl, and stared at the city lights twinkling on, one by one. This was Michael's final, absurd joke. Michael, the chaos bringer, the human element to Julian's cold logic, the man who always said, "Julian, you've built a fortress, not a life." It seemed he'd just lobbed a grenade over the wall. He turned back. The girl had finally moved. She had slipped off the bench and was standing in the middle of the vast marble floor, looking tiny and breakable. She was tracing the geometric pattern of the inlay with the toe of her worn sneaker. "Are you hungry?" Julian asked. She shook her head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. "Thirsty?" A shake. "Right." He sighed, running a hand over his immaculately trimmed stubble. "Follow me." He led her down a long, white hallway that looked more like a gallery than a home. His footsteps clicked. Hers were silent. He opened a door to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment. It was all shades of gray and cream, with a king-sized bed and a view that could induce vertigo. Ilara walked to the center of the room and stopped, clutching her bear. "The bathroom is through there," Julian said, pointing. "The kitchen is back the way we came. I'll have someone. Evelyn, bring you some things, clothes, food." He paused, feeling the inadequacy of the words. "I am sorry for your loss." Her head snapped up. Her blue eyes were not just sad, they were ancient. They were terrifying. She stared at him, and for the first time in his adult life, Julian Thorne felt utterly and completely outmatched. He backed out of the room, closing the door softly. He leaned against the wall in the hallway, his heart hammering in a way it hadn't since his very first venture capital pitch. He finally called Evelyn. "Evelyn, change of plans for the evening. Cancel the Tokyo call. I have a situation." "Is it legal, Mr. Thorne?" Evelyn's voice was perpetually calm. "It is. Bizarrely legal. It's a child. Michael Donovan's will." There was a long pause on the line. "A child?" "Yes, a girl. 7. Her name is Ilara. She's in guest suite 3. She needs everything, I suppose. Clothes, food that isn't. Whatever I have. Toys. Do children like toys? I'll handle it, sir. I'll also source 3 of the top child trauma specialists in the city and have their availability on your desk by morning." "Thank you, Evelyn. And quickly." He hung up and went to his study, a room lined with dark wood and glowing screens, and poured himself a very large, very expensive scotch. He stared at the legal document Ms. Alvarez had left, his name printed in stark black ink next to Michael's. "You insane bastard," he whispered to the empty room. "What did you do?" The first few days were a study in mutual avoidance. Julian left for his office before Ilara woke, and returned after Evelyn and a temporary, bewildered nanny had put her to bed. He received updates via text. Ilara ate 40% of her lunch. Chicken nuggets, organic. Ilara has not spoken, but she draws. The nanny reports she drew a picture of a large gray building with no windows. Ilara refuses to let the bear, Barnaby, out of her sight. The nanny attempted to wash it, and Alara became hysterical. We will not be attempting that again. Julian, in turn, had his legal team working 24/7. They confirmed everything. The will was ironclad. Michael Donovan had set up a complex trust for Alara, funded by his remaining shares in their company, a staggering amount. But the trust was contingent. It would be managed by the guardian. And the guardian was Julian. He was, in effect, chained to this. The money was secondary. The responsibility was the anchor. He couldn't just throw money at the problem and make it go away. Michael had insured it. On the fourth day, a Friday, Julian decided to work from home. He told himself it was to monitor the market shifts in Asia, but he knew it was avoidance. He couldn't keep hiding from a 7-year-old in his own home. He found her in the enormous living room. The nanny was sitting on one of the white sofas, reading a magazine, while Alara sat on the floor, on a small patch of sunlight. She had a new, expensive-looking sketch pad and a box of colored pencils. Evelyn's work. She was drawing, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Julian walked in, and the nanny sprang to her feet. "Mr. Thorne, we were just—" "It's fine, Clara. You can take a break. I'll stay with her." The nanny, a young woman named Clara, looked relieved and terrified. "She's been very quiet, I'm sure." Clara practically fled the room. Julian was alone with her again. He sat, not on the sofa opposite her, but on the floor, a good 10 feet away, leaning his back against a marble support column. It was uncomfortable in his suit, but it felt appropriate. He watched her draw. She was meticulous. She wasn't just scribbling. She was drawing a building, a tall glass building. He recognized it. It was this one, his penthouse. She was drawing the view from the window. "That's very good," he said. She didn't look up, but her pencil stopped. "You've captured the angularity." He felt like an idiot. "Angularity?" He tried again. "I'm Julian." She remained still. "I know you're Alara." She resumed drawing, pressing down harder with a gray pencil, outlining the steel beams. I knew Michael. We were partners. A long time ago." Her hand paused. "This," he noted, "a data point." He was. Very smart. And very chaotic. He used to bring a lizard to the office, a chameleon. He said it helped him think. A tiny, almost invisible smile touched the corner of her mouth, and then was gone. Julian felt a strange jolt, like a successful connection. "He was my friend," he said, the words tasting rusty. He hadn't realized until he said it how true it was, and how much he'd missed him. Alara put down her pencil. She looked at him, truly looked at him for a full minute. Her gaze was unnervingly direct. Then she picked up the sketch pad, tore out the drawing she'd been working on, and carefully tore out another one from behind it. She stood, walked over to him, and held them out. He took them. The first was the one she'd been drawing. The penthouse. It was precise, cold, and empty. The second. The second was a drawing of a woman in a bed. The woman had blonde hair like hers, but it was thin. Her eyes were closed. The room was dark, but for a single lamp. Next to the bed, a man with wild, curly hair, Julian recognized Michael's unruly mop, was sitting, his head in his hands. And in the corner, a small girl with braids was holding a bear. Julian's breath caught. It was a scene of profound, adult grief, captured by a child. "This is—" he struggled for a word. "This is your mother, Eliza." Alara nodded, her chin wobbling. "And Michael." She nodded again. She pointed to the drawing, to the woman. "Ah, Mommy," she whispered. The sound was like a tiny bell, fragile and clear. It was the first word he'd heard her speak. It cracked something open in his chest. "Yes, your mommy." She then pointed to the small girl in the drawing. Me. Yes, you. She looked up at him, her blue eyes swimming. They're gone. Yes, Julian said, his own throat tightening. They are. She didn't cry. She just stated it as a fact. Then she turned, walked back to her spot of sun, and picked up a new piece of paper. The conversation was over. Julian sat there for a long time, staring at the drawing. He looked at the woman, Eliza. He felt a pang of something. Recognition? No, just a deep, profound sadness. This woman. Michael had clearly loved her. Why? And why in God's name did that love lead to him? He went back to his study, the drawing in his hand. He placed it on his desk. He dialed Evelyn. Evelyn, I want you to stop the search for trauma specialists. Sir, I want you to. Find me a nanny, a proper one, not a temp. Someone. Warm. Someone who knows how to handle this. And clear my schedule for this afternoon. I'm taking Alara out. Out, sir. Where? I don't know. The park. Do they still have parks? I'll find one, sir. And I'll source a warmer nanny. Julian hung up and looked at the drawing. The woman in the bed. Eliza Vance. Who were you? He murmured. He took Alara to the park. It was a disaster. He was dressed in a $5,000 casual wear outfit, a cashmere hoodie and designer jeans selected by Evelyn that made him look like he was undercover. Alara, in a new bright yellow dress, looked equally out of place. She refused to go on the swings. She looked at the sandbox with faint disgust. She would not let go of his hand, or her bear. Other parents eyed him, this slick, stubbled man with the silent, porcelain doll child. He felt their judgment like a physical weight. Do you want ice cream? He offered, desperate. She shook her head. They sat on a bench in silence for 45 minutes, watching other children shriek and play. Julian checked his stock alerts 3 times before he realized how absurd it was. He put the phone away. I'm not good at this, am I? He said to the air. Alara turned her head and looked at him. She reached out her small, clean hand and patted his arm, twice, a gesture of comfort. It was so unexpected, so pure, that Julian felt a laugh bubble up. It was a rusty, unused sound. Okay, point taken. You're not having fun. I'm not having fun. Let's go home. They walked back to the car, and he felt lighter. It was a failure, but it was a shared failure. That night, the new nanny arrived. Her name was Mrs. Penny, a round, grandmotherly woman with a no-nonsense air and kind eyes. She walked in, took one look at Alara, one look at Julian, and one look at the kitchen. Well, this won't do at all, she said. Sir, this child needs soup. A proper grilled cheese sandwich, not whatever that is. She pointed to the chia seed and kale smoothie Julian's chef had left for Alara. Within an hour, the sterile kitchen smelled like a home for the first time. It smelled like melted butter and chicken broth. Julian, drawn by the scent, found Alara sitting at the massive quartz island, watching Mrs. Penny work. Now then, Mrs. Penny was saying, a bear like that. He must have seen some adventures. My son had a rabbit named Patches. Patches lost an eye in the Great Vacuum War of '98. Did Barnaby here ever fight a vacuum? Alara giggled. It was a tiny, silvery sound, but it was a giggle. She shook her head. He's very brave, she whispered. Oh, I can see that. A very brave bear, and a very brave girl. Mrs. Penny glanced at Julian, who was lingering in the doorway. Mr. Thorne, you're hovering. Either sit and have some soup or go back to your numbers. Julian, cowed, sat down. Mrs. Penny placed a bowl in front of him. It was simple, and it was the best thing he'd ever eaten. He watched Alara eat. She ate every bite. Later, as Mrs. Penny was tucking her into bed in the gray and cream guest room, Julian stood in the hall. He heard Mrs. Penny's low, soft voice reading a story. Not a financial report. A story about a dragon. He went to his study, but he didn't work. He just stared at the drawing of Eliza Vance. He had his team run a deeper search. Eliza Vance, born in Ohio, moved to the city 10 years ago, worked a series of waitressing jobs, no criminal record, no assets, no family. But there was one recurring address, a diner, the Bluebell Diner. It was in the old manufacturing district, right near where his first office, the one he shared with Michael, had been. A cold prickle went down his spine. He pulled up an old digital photo album from before the billions, before the penthouse, back when it was just him and Michael, two 20-somethings trying to build an empire on caffeine and code. He scrolled through pictures, team lunches, late-night coding sessions. And there, a picture of Michael, grinning, his arm slung around a young woman, a waitress. She was wearing a blue uniform, her blonde hair in a high ponytail. She was laughing, her head tilted back. She was beautiful. She was Eliza Vance. Julian stared at the photo. He remembered her. Vaguely. Eliza. The girl who always gave them extra fries and free coffee refills. The one Michael always flirted with. "She's our angel, Julian," Michael used to say. "Keeps us fueled." Julian had barely noticed her. He'd been too focused, too driven. He looked from the laughing girl in the photo to the sad, sick woman in Alara's drawing. And then he saw another photo. It was a group shot, outside the diner. Him, Michael, Eliza, a few other early employees. Julian was standing next to her. He had his arm, not around her, but resting on the back of her chair. He was smiling. A real, unguarded smile he didn't recognize. He remembered. Not just vaguely. He remembered. 3 months. After a major coding breakthrough, he and Michael had gone to the diner to celebrate. Michael left early. He had stayed. He and Eliza had talked. For hours. About his dreams. About her dreams. She wanted to be a painter. It had been easy. He hadn't been Julian Thorne, CEO. He'd just been Julian. It had lasted for those 3 months. Stolen coffees, late-night talks, a few shared, chaste kisses in the alley behind the diner. It was a brief, sweet moment of normalcy before his first big round of funding, before the cover of Wired, before the fortress of glass and steel had been built. And then he'd gotten the funding. He'd moved the company to a sleek new office tower. He'd changed his number. He'd forgotten. He'd left her behind, a casualty of his ambition. He looked at the photo, his hand shaking. He looked at the dates, the funding round, the move. He did the math. A sick, horrifying, cold calculation that his analytical mind performed automatically. He did it again. And again. "No," he whispered. "It's not possible." Alara had been born 9 months after he'd moved the company. 9 months after he'd last seen Eliza. He looked at the legal papers again. Alara Vance. The father was unknown. Michael had been her godfather, her protector. Michael, who had found her, pregnant and abandoned by his best friend, and had stepped in. Michael, who had never said a word, who had protected Eliza's secret, and, in his final, chaotic act, had delivered the consequence of Julian's ambition straight to his soundproof, sterile door. Julian felt the room spin. He stumbled out of his study and down the hall to Alara's room. He pushed the door open. She was asleep, bathed in the soft glow of a star-shaped nightlight Mrs. Penny had produced. Barnaby the bear was tucked under her arm, her blonde hair fanned out on the pillow. He walked closer, his heart feeling like it would burst from his chest. He looked at her, not as a problem, not as a responsibility. He looked for it, and he saw it. It wasn't just her hair, it was the shape of her brow, The slight cleft in her chin he'd always seen in his own mirror, the way her eyelashes curled. She was his. This small, silent, breakable girl. She was his daughter. He sank to his knees by her bedside, the realization a physical blow. All this time. All this time. He thought of Eliza, working in that diner, pregnant and alone. He thought of Michael, his friend, watching him become a mogul, knowing this secret and bearing the burden of it alone. He thought of the missed years. 7 years. He had a 7-year-old daughter, and he hadn't even known she existed. The next few weeks were a blur of seismic, internal shifts. Julian Thorne, the man who lived by a schedule broken into 5-minute increments, became a man adrift. He told Evelyn to clear his calendar, indefinitely. "Sir, the quarterly earnings call is next week. Reschedule, postpone, I don't care. Tell the board. I have a family emergency." Mr. Thorne, with respect, the market won't react well to indefinite. "The market," Julian said, his voice flat, "can wait." He started spending his days at home. He sat with Alara while she drew. He had Mrs. Penny teach him how to make a grilled cheese sandwich. His first attempt was a blackened, smoky mess. His second was soggy. Alara, watching his fumbling efforts, let out another one of her tiny, silvery giggles. "You're bad at this," she whispered, a small smile playing on her lips. "I'm very bad at this," Julian agreed, feeling a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the stove. "But I'll get better." He started to talk to her. He told her stories about him and Michael, about the old office, about the chameleon, who was named Pascal. He didn't mention the diner. He didn't mention Eliza. Not yet. He wasn't brave enough. He was a coward. He'd been a coward then, and he was a coward now. He was terrified that if he said the words, "I knew your mother, I left her," that this fragile, tentative connection they were building would shatter. But the secret was a living thing in the apartment, coiling in the spaces between them. Alara seemed to sense it too. She remained quiet, watchful. She would talk to Mrs. Penny, but with him she was still reserved, her whispers and small nods his only reward. One evening, Mrs. Penny was off. It was just him and Alara. He'd ordered pizza, a real, greasy pepperoni pizza, not the artisanal gluten-free kind his chef usually made. They were eating it on the living room floor, watching a cartoon about a magical dog. It was, Julian thought, the single most domestic moment of his entire adult life. Alara was carefully picking off the pepperoni. "You don't like those?" he asked. "They're too spicy." Ah, he'd have to remember that, a new data point. Alara finished her slice and wiped her hands on a napkin. She was looking at her bear, Barnaby, who was sitting beside her. The bear was, Julian had to admit, in rough shape. One of its button eyes was loose, and the seam on its back near the neck was splitting open. A small tuft of grayish stuffing was poking out. "Barnaby is hurt," Alara said softly, her small finger tracing the split seam. "He is," Julian agreed. "We should get him. To a toy hospital." "No!" Her reaction was sudden and fierce, her eyes wide with panic. "No doctors, no hospitals." Julian recoiled, realizing his mistake. Of course, her mother. Hospitals were where her mother had. "You're right. No hospitals. My mistake." Alara clutched the bear to her chest, her knuckles white. "Mommy made him. He's all I have." "I know, sweetheart, I know." Julian's heart ached. "But the seam. He's losing his stuffing. He'll deflate." Alara looked at the bear, then at Julian. "Can you fix him?" "Me?" Julian looked at his own hands, hands that signed multi-million-dollar contracts, that typed code, that were manicured weekly. "I don't know how to sew, Alara. Mommy showed me, but my fingers are too." Little. It's hard. She looked at him with a desperate, pleading hope. Please? It was the first time she had ever asked him for anything. Okay, Julian said, his voice tight. I'll try. I'll try. He had Evelyn send up a sewing kit from the building's concierge. It was a flimsy, hotel-style kit, but it had a needle and some black thread. He sat on the floor, cross-legged, the bear in his lap. Ilara sat opposite him, watching, her expression intensely serious. You have to do it right, she instructed, her voice a low whisper. You go in, and then you loop it. Mommy said it's called a blanket stitch. A blanket stitch. Got it. Julian threaded the needle, a task that took him an embarrassing 5 minutes. He poked his finger. Ouch. Be careful, Ilara chided. You have to be careful with him. I will. He started to sew, his large, clumsy fingers struggling with the tiny needle. His stitches were huge, uneven, and ugly. That's wrong, Ilara said, frowning. It's supposed to be tighter. I'm trying, Ilara. This is harder than it looks. He focused, his brow furrowed in concentration. He pulled the thread, trying to close the gap. The seam was thick, the fabric old and stiff. As he pushed the needle through, he felt something inside the bear. It wasn't just stuffing. It was something hard. A small, stiff packet. What? He murmured. What's wrong? Ilara asked, her voice sharp with anxiety. Nothing. Just a lump. The stuffing is bunched up. He carefully widened the hole, just a fraction, with his fingers. He felt it again. A small, square object, wrapped in plastic. His heart began to hammer. Ilara, did you know there was something in here? She shook her head, her eyes wide. It's just his fluff. Mommy said it's his courage. Right, his courage. Julian's hands were trembling. He pulled the thread tight, his stitch, and accidentally snagged the small packet. He pulled it out, along with a tiny bit of stuffing. Oh, look at that, he said, trying to keep his voice casual. What? What is this? It was a small piece of paper, folded into a tiny, tight square, and wrapped in a piece of a plastic sandwich bag, sealed with old yellowed tape. It was old. It had been in there a long time. Ilara stared at it. I don't know. It must have gotten in there by accident, when your mom, when she made him. Maybe. She looked suspicious. Give it. Let's finish sewing him up first, Julian said, his mind racing. Then we'll look. Deal? She nodded, her gaze fixed on the small packet he'd placed on the floor. Julian finished his sewing. It was without a doubt the ugliest repair in the history of stuffed animals. The black thread stark against the bear's faded brown fur, the stitches looked more like staples. There, he said, holding it up. Good as new. Almost. Ilara took Barnaby from him, inspected the seam, and hugged the bear. Thank you. She then pointed at the packet. Now look. Julian picked it up. His fingers fumbled with the old tape. He finally got it open and pulled out the folded note. The paper was thin, cheap notebook paper, and it was covered in a faint, spidery handwriting. He unfolded it. It wasn't long. It was dated just over 7 years ago, and it wasn't addressed to anyone. It just began. I don't know who will read this. Maybe no one, maybe a social worker, maybe a stranger. But if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And my daughter, my Ilara, is alone. I don't have anyone. Her father, he doesn't know she exists. He left and I was too proud, too scared to tell him. I thought I could do it alone. I did it for 7 years. But the sickness, it's fast. I can't protect her anymore. There is one person. His name is Michael Donovan. He was her father's best friend. He's been An angel to us. He helped me. He paid for my medicine when I couldn't. He loves Ilara. He promised me he would find a way. He promised he would get her to her father. His name is Julian Thorne. He's important now. Rich. He probably doesn't even remember me. Eliza Vance. From the diner. But he has to. He has to take her. Please, if this isn't Julian, find him. Tell him. Tell him Ilara is his. Tell him she was born on October 12th. Tell him she likes blueberry pancakes and is afraid of thunder. Tell him. Tell him her middle name is Hope. Ilara Hope Vance. Tell Julian. Tell him I'm sorry. And tell him I forgive him. Just love my baby. Please love my baby. Julian read the note. He read it again. And a third time. The words blurred, the ink swimming before his eyes. This was not a guess. This was not a calculation. This was a confirmation. A voice. A voice from the grave. A desperate plea from a woman he had. He had used and discarded like a rough draft. He looked up at Ilara. She was watching him, her small face anxious. What does it say? Is it from my mommy? Julian couldn't speak. A sound tore from his throat, a choked, agonizing sob that was ripped from a place deep inside him he hadn't known existed. He dropped the note and pulled his daughter, into his arms, burying his face in her clean blonde hair. The immaculate, controlled, elegant Julian Thorne shattered. He knelt on the marble floor of his penthouse, holding the daughter he never knew. And he wept. He wept for Eliza, dying alone in a dark room. He wept for Michael, his noble, silent friend. And he wept for the 7 years he had lost, 7 years of a life he had never even known he was missing. Ilara, stunned, was stiff in his arms for a long moment. Then, her small arms came up and wrapped around his neck. She patted his back, just as she had in the park. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice surprisingly strong. "Don't be sad. It's okay, Daddy." The word hit him harder than the note. Daddy. He cried harder, a raw, broken sound that echoed in the vast, empty room. He wasn't crying from sadness anymore. He was crying from a profound, terrifying, and absolute sense of being found. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a CEO. He was just a father. And he was 7 years late. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in Ilara's room, in a chair in the corner, and just watched her. He held the note in his hand, the thin paper feeling as heavy as a gold bar. Ilara Hope Vance. His daughter. He had a daughter. The words replayed in his mind, recalibrating his entire existence. Every success, every acquisition, every billion he had earned. It all felt like ash. He had been climbing a mountain only to reach the summit and find he'd been on the wrong mountain his entire life. Eliza. He remembered her so clearly now, her laugh, the way she'd bite her lip when she was pouring coffee. The little watercolor paintings she used to tape up in her locker, paintings he'd glanced at and dismissed. He had been so consumed by his own ambition, by his own potential, that he had failed to see the vibrant, real, breathing life right in front of him. And Michael. God, Michael. His friend had seen it all. He'd seen Julian's casual cruelty. He'd found Eliza, pregnant and abandoned. And instead of confronting Julian, instead of rage, he had chosen compassion. He had helped her. He had become Ilara's godfather. He had loved her. And he had constructed this final, desperate, brilliant plan to deliver Ilara to the only other person in the world who shared her blood. "You magnificent fool," Julian whispered into the dark. "Why didn't you just tell me?" But he knew why. He, of all people, knew. 7 years ago, 6, 5. He wouldn't have listened. He would have seen it as a shakedown. A problem to be solved with lawyers and a non-disclosure agreement. He would have thrown money at it. He would have paid for his problem to go away. He wouldn't have seen her. Michael knew that. He had to wait. He had to wait until Julian was, what? Older? Richer? Or maybe he just ran out of time, and in his death he'd forced Julian's hand. He'd trapped him with legal and financial bonds so strong he couldn't escape. He'd forced him to see the girl before he knew the truth. He'd given Ilara a chance to breach the fortress walls before Julian even knew he was under siege. When the sun began to stream in, painting the gray room in gold, Ilara stirred. Her eyes opened, blinked, and found him. She didn't seem surprised to see him there. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," he whispered back, his voice hoarse. He stood and walked over, sitting on the edge of her bed. He held out the note. This was from your mommy. You were right." She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "What did it say?" Julian took a deep breath. The truth. It was all he had left. It said she loved you very much, more than anything in the world. I know that. And it told a story. About me. And her. A long time ago. Before you were born. Ilara tilted her head. "You knew her?" "Yes," Julian said, his throat closing. "I knew her. We were friends. For a little while. At the diner. The one I told you about. The one with Michael? The one with Michael." He had to force the next words out. "Ilara. I didn't know it, but I was your father. I am your father." Ilara stared at him. Her face, so often a quiet, blank mask, showed nothing. She just stared. "My father? Yes. But my mommy said my daddy was in the stars. She said he was a star catcher." Julian felt a fresh wave of grief. A star catcher. A beautiful, kind lie to shield her from a truth Eliza probably couldn't bear to tell. That her father hadn't even been decent enough to say goodbye. She wanted to protect you," Julian said softly. "The truth is, I wasn't a star catcher. I was just a man. A very busy, very stupid man. I left. I moved to a new office, and I didn't know that you were coming. You left her." It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple statement of fact, like they're gone. "Yes," Julian whispered, shame burning his throat. "I left her, and I never knew. Until you came here. I never, ever knew. Ilara, I'm so sorry." He waited. He braced himself for what? For her to yell? To cry? To hate him? Ilara was quiet for a long moment. She looked at her hands, then at Barnaby, then back at him. "So, you're my real daddy?" "I am. And Michael was my godfather." "Yes, he and Eliza. They were trying to protect you, and they wanted you to be safe. That's why Michael sent you to me." She processed this, her 7-year-old mind working through a lifetime of information. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Okay." "Okay?" Julian was bewildered. "Just okay?" "You make bad grilled cheese," she said, a tiny smile flickering. "And you sewed Barnaby wrong. But you're here now." "I'm here now," he confirmed, his voice thick. "I'm not going anywhere, ever." "Okay." She held out her arms. "I'm hungry. Can we have blueberry pancakes?" Julian looked at her, this impossible, resilient, beautiful child. His daughter. "Blueberry pancakes," he said, scooping her up, bear and all. "I have no idea how to make them, but we're going to learn. Right now." The penthouse, once a temple of minimalist order, descended into chaos. Julian, guided by Mrs. Penny and a barrage of internet tutorials, attempted to create a life for Ilara. The gray and cream guest room was painted a bright, cheerful yellow, a color Ilara had picked. A mural of a forest, complete with magical dogs, was commissioned. Toys appeared. So many toys. Julian, in his grief and guilt, tried to buy back the 7 years he'd lost. He bought her a dollhouse taller than she was, a mountain of art supplies, a miniature electric car. Elara was polite about the gifts, but Julian noticed she still spent most of her time with her sketchpad and Barnaby. "Sir," Mrs. Penny said to him one afternoon, as Julian was trying to assemble a complex-looking swing set in the middle of his living room, "you cannot purchase your way into being a father." Julian stopped, a tiny Allen key in his hand. I'm just trying to make her happy, Mrs. Penny." "She doesn't need a swing set in her living room, Mr. Thorne. She needs you. She needs routine. She needs to know what tomorrow looks like, and the day after that. She needs to go to school. She needs to be a child, not a recipient." Julian looked at the half-built swing set, a monument to his own inadequacy. "You're right. Of course you're right. School. I'll have Evelyn find the best private school in the city. Or," Mrs. Penny suggested gently, "you could find a good, normal school, one with other children." The shift was monumental. Julian Thorne didn't just re-enter the world. He re-entered a different world. He, Elara, and Mrs. Penny visited schools. He sat in tiny chairs and talked to principals who were not intimidated by his net worth. He fumbled his way through applications. They finally settled on a small, progressive school that emphasized art and emotional learning. The other parents in the drop-off line were not his crowd. They were writers, artists, and academics. They drove hybrids and wore sensible shoes. Julian, in his custom suit, pulling up in his chauffeured Maybach, was an alien. On her first day, Elara, in her new uniform, clung to his leg. "What if they don't like me?" she whispered, her old fear returning. "Then they're idiots," Julian said fiercely, crouching down to her level, ignoring the crease in his trousers. He smoothed her hair. "You are Elara Hope. You are brilliant, and you are brave, and you are kind. You just be you. And if anyone is mean to you, I will. I will buy their apartment building and have them evicted." Elara giggled. "Daddy, you can't do that." "Watch me," he said, grinning. "Now go. Go be brilliant." She ran off, her new backpack bouncing, and for a moment, just a moment, she looked back and waved. Julian waved back, feeling a swell of pride so fierce it almost knocked him over. His phone buzzed. "Evelyn." "Sir, the board is demanding a definitive date for your return." Julian watched Elara disappear into the school. "Evelyn, buy the building across the street from my office. The old one. The one with the diner." "Sir?" "The Bluebell Diner. It's practically derelict." "I know. Buy it. And then, call my personal architect. I'm moving the company." "And Evelyn?" "Yes, sir?" "Sell the penthouse." Life found a new rhythm. It was messy, loud, and utterly exhausting. Julian moved them into a sprawling old brownstone with a yard. A real yard, with grass and a massive oak tree. His suits were replaced by jeans and sweaters. His immaculately groomed stubble was often just stubble. He learned to make blueberry pancakes. The secret, he discovered, was buttermilk. He learned how to braid hair, badly. He learned how to navigate parent-teacher conferences. "Elara is a remarkable child, Mr. Thorne," her teacher, Ms. Bright, said. "She's academically miles ahead. Her art, it's frankly astonishing. But she's hesitant. She holds back. She's a watcher." "She's been through a lot," Julian said, the understatement of the century. We're working on it." He was. He had finally found a therapist. Not for Elara, but for him. He sat in a plush armchair once a week and talked about his ambition, his guilt, and his profound, terrifying love for his daughter. He talked about Eliza. He was trying to untangle the knot of his own past. The new office was a revolution. He'd moved his entire multi-billion-dollar company into the refurbished warehouse. He'd kept the original brickwork. The executive offices, instead of being on the top floor, were on the ground floor. And the centerpiece of the new campus was the diner. He'd had it restored. Not modernized, but restored. The same cracked linoleum, the same red vinyl booths, the same Formica countertops. It was now the official company cafeteria, serving the same menu. Free coffee, extra fries. "Julian, are you insane?" his CFO had demanded. "We're a cutting-edge tech firm, not a 1950s nostalgia trip. This is terrible for our image." "This," Julian had said, his voice quiet but final, "is where this company was born. This is why we have an image. It stays." He took Alara there every Sunday. They would sit in the same booth he and Michael and Eliza used to share. He would tell her stories. "Your mom, she used to doodle on the napkins. She drew this one picture of me and Michael as, I think we were superheroes. I had a cape made of numbers." "And you?" Alara asked, sipping her chocolate milkshake. "What did you do?" I just talked. I talked about all the things I was going to build. And she just listened. She was a very good listener. She was a painter," Alara said softly, as if sharing a secret. "She painted. All the time. But she burned them. She—" "What?" "Before the hospital. She burned all her pictures," she said. "She said they were just old dreams." Julian felt a cold stab of regret. He had done that, his ambition, his abandonment. He had burned her dreams. "Well," he said, his voice thick, "we're going to build new ones." He kept his word. He started a foundation, the Eliza Vance Foundation. Its mission was simple: to fund childcare and healthcare for single mothers working in the service industry. He poured hundreds of millions into it. It wasn't atonement. He knew he could never atone. It was a legacy. A way to make sure that what happened to Eliza would not happen to anyone else if he could help it. He also took Alara to the cemetery. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. They stood before two graves, side by side. Michael's was simple, a rugged piece of granite. Eliza's was new, a simple white marble stone. Julian had agonized over the inscription. In the end, it just said, "Eliza Vance, 1988-2025. A painter, a mother, loved." Alara placed a drawing on the grass. It was a picture of the three of them, Eliza, Michael, and a tiny Alara, holding hands, smiling. "I miss them," she whispered. "Me too," Julian said, his hand on her shoulder. "Every day." They stood in silence for a long time. "Daddy?" "Yeah." Mommy said. She said Michael was her best friend. "He was," Julian said. "He was. The best." "Was he your best friend too?" Julian looked at Michael's grave. "He was. I was too stupid to know it until it was too late." "It's not too late," Alara said, taking his hand. "We know it now." Time, which had once been his enemy, a thing to be beaten and optimized, became his friend. It flowed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into a year. It was Alara's 8th birthday. The Brownstones' backyard was a riot of color and sound. Mrs. Penny, now a permanent, live-in, and utterly essential part of their lives, was managing a swarm of 8-year-olds who were deep in a water balloon war. The warm nanny had become a grandmother. Julian, wearing an apron that said "Danger, Man Cooking," a gift from Alara, was at a massive grill, burning hot dogs. His suit-wearing self would have been horrified. This version of him was just happy. He was covered in sweat, mustard, and a splash of ketchup from a stray water balloon. "Heads up, Mr. Thorne," one of Alara's friends yelled, lobbing a balloon. Julian ducked, laughing, and it splattered against the oak tree. He looked up. His old life. The penthouse, the endless meetings, the sterile quiet. It felt like a dream. A black and white movie about someone else. This was real. The smell of cut grass and burnt meat. The sound of children screaming with joy. He saw Evelyn, his long-suffering, brilliant PA, sitting on the porch sipping lemonade. She was wearing a sundress. She'd become not just an employee, but a friend. An aunt. She managed his life, Ilara's school schedule, and the foundation with equal, terrifying efficiency. "Cake!" Mrs. Penny called out, and the horde descended on the patio. Julian turned off the grill and watched as Ilara, her face smeared with chocolate, her hair having escaped its braid, blew out her candles. She wasn't just neat anymore. She was messy. She was loud. She was happy. She was Ilara Hope. After the cake, as the party was winding down and parents were collecting their sticky, exhausted children, Ilara ran up to him. She was holding a small, wrapped gift. This is for you," she said, suddenly shy. "For me. But it's your birthday. I know. But I made you something." He took the small box. He opened it. Inside, on a bed of cotton, was Barnaby the bear, but he was different. He was whole. Ilara, with Mrs. Penny's help, had spent weeks carefully restitching every seam. She had found 2 perfectly matched shiny black buttons for his eyes. He had a new bright red ribbon around his neck. He was immaculate. But he wasn't just immaculate. He was loved. "Ilara, he's perfect. But he's yours. He's ours," she corrected, her voice serious. "He's the one who had the note. He's the one who brought you to me." She pointed to the clumsy, thick black stitching on his back that Julian had made over a year ago. She hadn't removed it. She had sewn around it, incorporating his ugly, fumbling repair into the bear's new life. "You fixed him first," she said, "so he's part of you too." Julian felt the familiar burn behind his eyes. He knelt, pulling her into a fierce hug, lifting her off the ground. "I love you, Ilara Hope. More than all the stars." "I know," she whispered into his ear, her arms tight around his neck. "I love you too, Daddy." He held her, his daughter, the girl who had saved him from a life of sterile, wealthy poverty. He looked over her shoulder, at the messy yard, at the half-eaten cake, at the house that was finally, truly, a home. He hadn't just adopted a poor girl. She had, in every way that mattered, rescued him.